That's when I stood up for my family to correct everything. And that's what we're doing today. So it's time for these things now and like that. So, but my uncle that got killed in France, World War I, we've seen military records where 1921, he was put on a ship in Belgium and brought back. They docked in New Jersey. He was put on a train, and they returned him to Dupree, South Dakota, where I live today, where the Blood family lives today. That's how they returned my uncle in 1921. And after 2 years after this war, when they returned all the soldiers, the countries that were involved in World War I, some of them protested in the United Nations. They said, why are these natives fighting for the United States when they're their own country? So in 1924, to get around this, the United States made a Citizen Act, made a citizen of this country in 1924. So my grandfathers, they said, this is when they put our people under democracy. And they said democracy was a legal way to lie, cheat, and steal by majority rule, why everybody has a right to vote today. So under this system, 51% over 49%, they're going to go at 51%, no matter if it's right or wrong, majority rules. And then my grandfather said, this is when they put our people under taxation. This is when we were given a Social Security number. We became a taxable item. So under democracy and taxation, you could change your name 100 times, but your identity is your Social Security number that you carry. You're a taxable item. So this is where, as truth, under democracy and taxation, if you think you own land or whatever, like this, try not paying your taxes for 1 year. They'll come and foreclose you and give to somebody that will pay these taxes. So as truth, you don't own nothing under this system. And this is what they put our people under in 1924. So 2024, we're just now going to be an American citizen for 100 years. When my grandfather said we've been here before anybody came to this continent of these red nations. So they said these red nations, when they were here, before anybody came here, there was no jealousy, there was no greed, there was no selfishness, no judgmental criticism, superstitious, or fear. These 7 English words never existed on this continent of these red nations. These were brought here. So my grandfathers, they said, when just the red nations were here, we called each other Huhunupa, in our language means two-legged. In the 1800s, my grandfather said, this two-legged became Makawicha, in our language means earthman. How my grandfathers look at a person. It had no skin color. It was a person that had a red heart, felt for nature, wanted what was right, good, positive, true, sacred. And this person, when he or she stepped outside their home and stepped on Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, they stepped on her with respect. They walked on her with respect because they knew she was a living thing that they're walking on. Because all life grows on our grandmother, including us. So this is what black, red, yellow, white are forgetting, how to walk on our grandmother. Because our grandfather said they were all put on this earth with truth. They were all put on this earth equally. And this is what they're forgetting about. So 2001, when I was told to stand up for my family, because when I got into my culture, my grandfather said, if you do the culture, no politics. If you do politics, no culture. You can't mix both of them. So which one is it going to be, grandson? So I said, I'll do the culture and leave politics alone. By 2001, when I was told to stand up for my family, my grandfather said, this one time, grandson, we're going to allow you to do politics. So this is when I stood up for my family to correct everything. But this two-legged Earthman, 2001, they said, when I was told to do this, grandson, remind them, today truth, honesty, and trust is missing in this world. So tell the world of these things that they're missing. So this is our 277th time I'm going to say this to the world. That whenever you're truthful and honest with yourself, when you don't lie to yourself, then you don't lie to the Creator or God, or you don't lie to people when you talk to them. And when you walk like this, that's when the trust comes back. Because sometimes trust has to be earned. So this is how truth, honesty, and trust is going to come back into this world. But like anything, only each individual could do this. Nobody could do it for you. Only you could do this. Nobody could walk in your shoes. Only you can. So my grandfather, as I said, grandson, when you was born with two sets of eyes. One that you see everything physical. So I always use our book as an example. When you look at that, you see a book. But your other set of eyes is when you use your heart through your eyes. In our language, we call it Chante Ishta. Then you see the real truth. So when you look at your heart through your eyes at our book, for the real truth, it came from a tree, how paper was made. That's the real truth. So it's time to look at the real truth of things and like this. But again, only each individual could do this. Nobody could do it for you. And like this, so it's up to each individual to make these changes that need to be done. So this IME system, they put us under democracy and taxation. I mean, coming across this country, that system, run into people, and we've seen it in the big cities, where a person could live beside another person for 20, 30 years and not even know that person's name, their neighbor. That's the IME system. When these red nations were here, it was we and us. We thought of others like this. So to think of others, this is where we need to think about Grandmother Earth, Unchimaka. Time to stand up for her and defend her. So these kind of things, the changes that need to happen, only we could do this, each individually. Nobody could do it for us. So it's time to be truthful and honest with yourself. Time to not lie to yourself. Time to look at a person's heart, not the color of their skin. And like this, time for these things. Time to heal our grandmother, to walk on her with respect and all this. This is what people forget when they come out to home. They're already looking way over there, they're on a schedule, all this stuff. So when 2007, I had a friend that heard us talk up there at Little Bighorn Battlefield. His name was William Carrington. And his grandfather was here, 1866 to 1868, at Fort Phil Kearny, Story, Wyoming, which today is between Buffalo and Sheridan, Wyoming. And when his grandfather was here, he was the commanding officer of that fort. So we met him at Little Bighorn. And he heard us talk about my grandfather's agency, so he said, I only live an hour from Washington, D.C. Can I go look for your grandfather's agency? I said, go ahead, go look. But I told my younger brothers, I want to see if he's really serious in what he said. because people say things and not do it. So, and there he called back and he said, I went to the Smithsonian. I went to the American Library of Congress. I didn't find it there. So I knew that he was seriously looking then, so I'll go to the Secretary of State office. And he's a historian, so, because he did some research and stuff at the Smithsonian, and they know him over there. And these historians, when they get that degree, they're given a code. When they research, they have to be shown original copies of things. They could look deeper than we can as citizens. And so I told him where it was, so he called back, and this is what he said, that I went to the Secretary of State office and I asked, and two security led me downstairs. Led me down the hall, and they opened this door to this room. In this room, there's a table sitting there with glass over the top of this table. And under this glass was Kearsarge agency, a docket number, land description. Had a presidential seal on it. Now remember what you said about that presidential seal. Because under the federal government, the federal law, when the president puts a presidential seal on a document, that's an executive order. And under the federal law, a presidential seal that's not broke is still law today. So he said, I remember what you said, so I walked around this table and I inspected this seal. Your grandfathers didn't lie. That seal's not broke. So I said, our grandfathers don't lie to us. And this is where, if you have faith in truth, if somebody told you a truth, you don't have to go see, or you don't have to go touch it to make sure it's real, if you're told the truth. You have that faith in that. This is what, so he called back and said, I seen it. It's sitting over there. While we're in this federal court case today to determine the blood heirs of the Kearsarge estate. It's for my grandfather's agency that was promised to him. So coming from a federal agency, Shan River, when this federal government made these federal agencies, it's called trust status lands on these federal agencies. And trust status lands are non-taxable. A non-Indian can't own it, sell it, live on it, or trade it. Because I have some of this land on Shan River where I come from, trust status lands. Well, that's how we want my grandfather's agency, 8.7 million acres, all in trust status lands. And these are laws this government made when they put us on these federal agencies. And they made these to make us lose our identity, who we are, these federal agencies. It almost worked. But now we're starting to stand up with truth now. Time to stop lying to ourselves and like this. Time to think of our ancestors before anybody came to this continent, how they walked here and looked at life and like this. So these kind of things is happening, is coming. So 2001, when I was told to stand up for my Lakota grandfathers, my Nakota grandfathers said, grandson, don't forget about us. And that's where the Iowa Territory came. And the Iowa Territory was a Dakota, Nakota, and the Wahpeton Nations land bases. And so today, if you have an old encyclopedia set, you could look under President Van Buren. He was the 8th president. It's in your encyclopedia if you have an old one. And on the first page, it shows this Iowa Territory that I'm talking about. So, but it's half of South Dakota, east half of North Dakota. It's all of Minnesota, west part of Wisconsin, all of Iowa. That's the Dakota, Nakota, and Wahpeton Nations land bases. So we had this checked out in 2008, and we had some lawyers from Sioux Falls and Rapid City go check this out for us. And before they left, we gave them 2 names. And when they went to Washington, they were up there for 2 weeks researching and like this. They came back and they said, we found a paper trail up there. everything you guys said was true. One thing about this country, whether they're right or wrong, they document everything. So they tell on themselves. So when we were up there, we told them these two names you gave us. And the government said, where did you get these names? These are classified names that you gave us. So we had to tell them the truth. They said, you gave it to them in 1838 when you came and surveyed this Iowa territory. 1 square mile like this. So the names that we gave them were on this map that they made in 1838 of the Dakota, Lakota, and the Wapta Nations land bases. That was a map maker and the surveyors at that time. Their names were on this map. So they know that we've seen this map. We know that this exists. So I stood up for my Dakota and Lakota grandfathers. But they said they couldn't file it in the United States because that land base goes into Canada and involves Canada and the United States, so it becomes an international case to correct it. So this international lawyer that's coming for our Kearsarge family is going to file this in world court. It's time for truth now, and like this. So then my Cheyenne grandfather said, don't forget about me. Because maternal side of my family, because paternal, I'm Kearsarge's grandson. My maternal side, of my mom's side, I'm Black Buffalo's grandson, Nikozu Lakota. Morning Star, Dull Knife, Cheyenne, I'm a grandson of him. I'm also a grandson of War Eagle, Dakota, Lakota, Milwaukeean, Wakpekute. And I'm also a grandson of Paul Traversy, Théophile Brewer, Frenchman. I also have French grandfathers. And that's my identity, who I am. So that's where when you deny a bloodline that's in you, you're denying a grandfather or a grandmother. You're forgetting about them. So it's time to really look at yourself and be truthful and honest with yourself like this. So my Cheyenne grandfather said their nation is the Platte River, Nebraska, and Wyoming, east side of the Rockies, all the way down to the Santa Fe Trail. That's the Cheyenne Nation. My grandfather, Morning Star Dull Knife, said my father, Shaolai, is buried west of today Fort Collins. He left in 1908, so he had a probate and like this, a death certificate. But he said that's the Cheyenne ancestral burial grounds of their nation before anybody came to this continent, just like the Black Hills is for us, for our nation. So today, the Kearsarge family, what my grandfather was doing when he was here, preserving, protecting the Black Hills, we're also going to do that too, using their laws that they made against, for these agencies they put us on. Time for truth now, like this. So that's what I would say. I hope my French grandfathers don't want me to go claim France. Yeah, but when we went to Norway last summer, because our book is Norwegian, we did some talks and like there's signings over there. We did 11 of them, so Europe has heard this, what I was told to tell the world. But I told my friends, I said, my first step, I step onto Europe, I'm planning a staff. I'm claiming Europe for the Great Sioux Nation. Just what they did when they came here. So I'm going to do the same when I go over there. So they said, you should live stream that. But these kind of things, it's time for truth now and like this, and a lot of corrections. There's a lot of assumptions out there and like this. So these kind of things we're correcting for my grandfathers and like that. So, but this book came out in 2016. So this is where we always ask when we give these talks, if you read it and you have any questions. And also, the Blood Family, we have a page in Facebook called Kashunka Witiko Tiwahi, Crazy Horse Family. You could go to that page after you read the book. If you have any questions, you could ask on there. You'll be talking to me and Bill, we're the administrators of that page. So we'll answer any questions. Today, there's over 56,000 following our page worldwide. So there's a lot of people that watch what we do. Like this. But our family, in our language, Wopilatunka means a big we thank you from the Crazy Horse family for coming and listening. You guys all have a safe journey home and like this, but now it's time for questions. So if you have any questions, it's time for that. So thank you very much for listening to me. And my Rushmore fits on my grandfather's cheek right here.
Okay.
So might have to make 15 Mount Rushmore just to cover my grandfather's head, because they're carving a whole mountain, so it's going to take some time.
I got a question
Yes.
for you about that. How do you guys relate to that? I'm sure Crazy Horse was probably would never carve a beautiful mountain.
1948, we met with Korzak,
Yeah,
and he asked permission from the family to do
from
this.
the family.
Yes, and we gave him permission. And so that's why their dream up there that they have when we'll be in litigation for a while when this court case is done, determine the blood heirs, but in our litigation, we know we're going to have funds. So we want Korzak and Ruth's dream to come true. So we're going to do a medical university up there that's going to teach modern and traditional medicine. And like our grandfather said, a time and day in the future is coming when the sick of the world are going to be sent there to get healed. So we're in support of that. So, and also because my grandfather is really thinks about the children, because in 1889-90, when this country said kill the Indian and save the man, they took our children, sent them to Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Oregon, like that. And some of our children are laying over there in a grave as unknown on the headstones. But our nation has our way of living life, our way of prayer. We have a way to find out their families and like this. So when we're legal like this and we have the funds, we're going to return all the children to their families. So like my grandfather, that's his wish. Yes.
Thank you very much for both of you for the great book and this very, illuminating, clarifying history. In the book, you talk about Crazy Horse's death, and he was wearing a red blanket, a robe.
Yeah.
And then later in the book, there was a reference to a red blanket, a beaded blanket. Now, is this the same blanket?
No.
Does the family still have?
No, everything was stolen in
everything was
1966.
stolen? I was wondering if the family
That belonged
still
to
had
it.
the blanket.
So we kind of know where it's at, but it'll be better when we're legal, that you have the law behind you to get these things that need to be. But the main thing is we got his pipe back to correct everything. And the one that has it doesn't even know that has it. They have it. It's in boxes in their basement. So, no, that was her father that had that stuff. When her father passed, they gave all that father stuff to her, and she just put it in the basement without looking. So a lot of stuff is still sitting there, but it's better to come and say we're the Crazy Horse family, and we could prove it in federal court who we are, because of all the assumptions that were done before. We're able to prove who we are. So now it's time to have the proof with the law behind you to get these things back and like that. Because that belongs to my grandfather. So, and like that. So, but do it legally. Yeah, and like this. So, yeah. Any more questions? Yes?
How does the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 play into all this?
It doesn't. When this country declared war on us in 1876, under international laws, when one country declares war on another country, all agreements, treaties made between these two countries become null and void in a court of law. So when the United States declared war on us in 1876, all agreements and treaties made with our nation, the Lakota Nation, you can't use it in a court of law. So that means that all the treaties are no good for us. Why? They can't use them. And like this. So this is how, when the Dakota and Lakota nations, how we showed that Indian agent, his name was Ramsey, that was having our people, the Dakota and Lakotas, sign a paper and said, if you sign this, we'll give you double rations and we'll give you seed to plant and like this. So they were all signing this paper when in reality they were giving their lands away, signing their lands away. So when this was reported to Washington, Washington came to investigate and they caught him in the act. So they took him back to Washington, they indicted him, found him guilty, and relieved him of his duties because he was an Indian agent. Where today, this Indian agent is the superintendent that's sitting on these agencies under the BIA. That's the Indian agent today. But when we were in Sioux Falls giving a talk like this, and in the audience was the federal judge that awarded this court case with the Harnell Brewing Company back to the family. He said, I'm the federal judge that gave this back to you, families. I said, thank you very much. And like this, but after the questions, then I raised my hand, so everybody really looked at me because I was sitting up front. But I said, I have a question for a federal judge. When a federal official breaks the law, is indicted and found guilty, all transactions by that government official become null and void. You can't use it in a court of law. He said that's a federal law. So when Ramsey did this as an Indian agent, people thought they signed their lands away. You can't use that in a court of law because he was found guilty. So as truth, these lands still belong to the Dakota and Lakota nations and the Wapta nations. That's their lands. But because it's an international case, because it goes into Canada, it has to be filed in world court to correct that. So this is what we're doing for my grandfathers. These things. So they're the ones that taught us these laws by putting us under 5 laws that we live by every day. Like that. So, yeah. So, yes.
This summer when you were speaking, I asked you about the term Oglala, and you said it was a paper tribe or a paper...
Yes, my grandfather said Oglala and Chichangu were paper tribes created by this government in 1886. And on Pine Ridge, they tell them every year, they have a radio station there called KILI. And every year they tell them, September 20th, 1886, Red Cloud was recognized as chief of the Oglala band. When his family just recently did a autobiography of Red Cloud where they tell in there that he's from the Cuthead band, because that's what his father signed under the 1868 treaty when they made that. And that's where he's from. He's from the Cuthead band. So these 7 nations of the Lakota, 4 of them was put on Shan River, where I'm from. The Mnikoju, the Two Kettle, the Blackfoot, and the Nobos. Itazichos means Nobos. And then there's Hunkpapa, there's Cuthead, and there's Flathead. These are the 7 bands of the Lakota. So, as assumption, this is where a lot of assumptions started. When my grandfather was assassinated in 1877, 9 years later, Red Cloud was recognized as the chief of the Oglala band. So how could my grandfather be in Oglala when they didn't even exist when he got assassinated? So that's a lot of assumptions that are out there. And if using these 6 documents, if they look before 1886, because after the Battle of Little Bighorn, there were 6 bands of the Lakota the Dakota, the Nakota, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho were all put on Red Cloud Agency. So how could these 10 groups become something that they're not in 1886? That's not their true identity. So this is where when somebody says they're from a Burnt Eye or from Oglala, Chichango, Oglala, they're only looking back to 1886. They're not looking beyond that. When our nation had been here before anybody came to this continent of these red nations. So it's time to look at your ancestors. So when Bill was to do his genealogy, you're going to find out you're not from here. You all came from Europe. So when I was in Europe, when I talked of the Battle of Little Bighorn, over there they said the Americans did that. So I had to tell them the truth. All the Americans came from Europe. That's truth. So if you do your genealogy, that's what you're going to find, unless you're from one of these red nations. Obama said it too. Told the truth. So it's time to look at these things, the real truth, with your heart, and then don't lie to yourself. Thank you. Yes?
I think you said it was in 1877 that
Some of his followers went, but when my grandfather came on the scene, let's go over here, they all went. Let's go do this, they all went. So when the government seen that the people are following him, well, we're going to deal with him for his people. So we'll give him this agency and like this. So that agency was put into Washington in 1874 by his uncle, Longhorn. So when they asked him that, we'll promise an agency, I said, I want my uncle's agency that you put in Washington in 1874. That was put up there. But there's a modification, but only the blood family knows these things. So, it's time for truth now, and time to really seek it. Because under this system, that's why I didn't want to do politics. but they taught me to do these things. Yeah. Yes?
So what's your political vision for the time when possibly you get that?
Whenever this court case is done and federal law says you guys are blood family, I have to follow protocol. I have to meet with the South Dakota senators and representatives, and they're the ones that have to introduce this to Congress, because that's how these states get heard. I have to follow that protocol because we're under this system.
But you're heading somewhere.
Yeah, and that's to get his agency that was promised to him, and under this trust status lands, they have to move everybody out of there because there's 119 families that are entitled to that agency. So we're doing what my grandfather is doing. He's still preserving, protecting the Black Hills, which is our cemetery that we're protecting, our people. So it's a wake-up call, because that's not our nation. It's the headwaters of Missouri to the headwaters of the North Platte. That's our nation. So all these red nations, I refer to them as nations because under the United Nations, what they recognize as a country, you have to have a land base, you have to have culture, tradition, and language. These 4 things you got to have. So all the red nations that are here have that. Why I refer to them as red nations, because they could be recognized under the United Nations as a country. So it's time to think of our ancestors. Time to, like this. So these guys, yes?
Hi, my name is David Costello. I grew up on the Mattaponi Indian Reservation in Virginia. My ancestry goes back to Powhatan, the father of Pocahontas. My great-grandfather was Chief George D. Ferris Thundercloud Costello. And there's a reason I have my tribal ID card in my hand. I wonder, in the course of your legal proceedings, before you had to prove your identity
Yeah.
as a descendant of Crazy Horse. Did you find it frustrating that American Indians are the only race, ethnic group in this country that are required to prove their race and ethnicity?
Yeah, but that's the system they put us under, you know, so we just have to follow protocol and like that, you know. But if you stand up for your nation, your grandfathers, who you are, your identity, you're a nation. So what you do for your nation is what's right, good, positive, truth, and sacred. But only you could do that for your nation. And just like my grandfather, when he was here, by example, he did these things. Now you have a way to do these things, to stand up for your people. All the, you know, across the country coming, met a lot of red nations that aren't recognized under the federal government, because the federal government recognizes by blood. But yet they say, but they're recognized under the state. But they're not showing proof of blood to the government to be recognized as a federal agency. But yet they're still remembering where they come from. So it's,
I had to go through the whole blood quantum.
yeah. But us, we got
Records and,
we got put on these agencies because we could show our proof of blood who we are. That's why this government recognizes enrollments and allotments from these federal agencies as proof of your identity, who you are, because you could show by blood your identity, and like this. So that's why they recognize these and stuff. So it's
it's just been frustrating to me, the fact that
yeah,
you have to even prove
yeah.
that you're American Indian.
So this is what when we showed our proof, because of these families, these bands, these nations that have been assuming my family and grandfather. So under the federal law, when you determine the blood heirs, it's time to show proof how you're connected by blood to a grandfather or like this. And they can't contest it if you can show your proof like this. So sometimes they talk about DNA. When the Smithsonian gave Sitting Bull's hair back, Bill worked with Sitting Bull's grandson too. And they went to Copenhagen, Denmark, and they did a DNA on his hair because they got it back from the Smithsonian. And when they did the DNA, then they checked his grandson's DNA. And it was the same. That was his grandfather's hair. But this person said that the DNA, he did the DNA of this world, and the Asian, African, and Caucasian DNA all came from Europe. And the Red Nation's DNA was unique because their DNA you can't find anywhere in this world but where they're at today. With the exception of, I think the Apache and the Hopi have some Asian DNA in their DNA. So they're the ones that came across the Bering Strait and came down like this. Why those Asian DNAs and those two Red Nations DNA. But the other Red Nations that have been here have always been here.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so when my grandfather said, grandson, we walked with the dinosaurs. We did. We walked with the dinosaurs. They didn't lie to me. Yeah, so, why in our language we have a word for dinosaurs. Yeah, so, our grandfathers don't lie to us when it comes to stuff like this. So. But yeah, I mean, every nation has to stand up and do it for their nation. And like this. Nobody could do it for you. And like this, only you can. Just like what we're doing with my grandfather. We started out standing up from our family, now our nation, nations, and like that, of my grandfathers.
Well, my dad married a white woman, which obviously adds to the confusion, which is why every time I have a conversation like this, the first thing I do is reach my card.
Yeah.
But I find that frustrating. It's like,
And then,
I talk to somebody and they go, "You don't look Indian."
yeah,
And my first question to them is like, "How do you know what Indians look like?"
Yeah.
I don't know what you told
So yeah, I mean, in our culture, we don't have greats in front of a grandfather or a grandson. That's European when they use greats. That's not our way. You're either a grandfather or a grandson. And like this, so when we put these blood trees together, on a paternal side, there's 9 generations. I'm fourth. My dad was third. So if I use that way, I'm 3 great-grandfather to that 9th generation. So my grandchildren are already great-grandfather to that 9th generation, even though they're just born, they're a day old, if we use that system. But that's not our way.
It's the same way with cousins.
Yeah, I mean, and then us, we have a kid name and we have an adult name. Siblings, brothers and sisters, all have a different name. European, they'll just use one name for hundreds of years, centuries. They'll use one name. Us, everybody has a different name. So you have to know your family and like this. Yeah, so these kind of things only we could do if you're from a blood family. Like that. So. Yes?
What is your Lakota name?
My Lakota name is Sintesapla Nicho. Blacktail calls you in English. That's my name. Yep. Yes?
Did your family know where Crazy Horse is buried?
Yes, we do. My grandfather said a time and day in the future will come when the world will know, but not right now. Because if we say it right now, they'll be over there bothering my grandfather. And because they won't have faith in truth. They're going to have to go see, have to touch it, and have to make sure it's, have to do a DNA and all this stuff like that. And that's not, you know. Any more questions? Yes?
I'm just curious to know, how has your book been received within the Lakota community?
It's received good, but the one that I have a hard time is Pine Ridge and Rosebud.
With what?
Pine Ridge and Rosebud are having a hard time with it because they're the ones that made the 500 books, movies that are made. And that's not the truth. Why, that's truth, we could say those are all assumptions. Because they all say my grandfather's Oglala when that started in 1886. He died in 1877, 9 years before that started. So that's where assumptions started. It's not the truth. But nobody said anything until 2001. Now we could say this. You know, that's not why we're doing this.
We got well received at Crazy School and
Yeah, on Pine Ridge, they invited me and Bill to the Crazy Horse School. So we talked to the children there. And they honored us and gave us, sang honor song, gave us blankets, and all the children came and shook our hands. You know, so, you know, I mean, it's the ones that have been assuming for so long that they don't want to change because truth hurts. So when I was young and my father said, what your grandfather put on that rock are the ones that killed him are claiming him today. So that's those two agencies that had a hand in his death, but they're claiming him. And that's why they're having a hard time. So, you know, so I mean, what was that? 4 days ago, we were in the Mohawk Nation, and that woman came and, how come you're doing this now? And like this. I said, we're correcting the truth. You know, the assumptions were truth. I said, there's 500 books written, movies that are made. This is just one book that we're making, correcting all of this. You know, and we were told to take a vow of silence. I said, you guys didn't, because there's 500 books written and movies that are made, you know, about my grandfather, claiming my grandfather. Now a grandson is saying those are all assumptions, not truth. You know, and you're worried about just one book that we wrote from the blood family? You guys wrote 500 and movies, made movies and everything. Come on now, you know. But I think she was trying to promote a book that she's writing or something. But you know, I mean, it's time for truth now. And just like Bill said, you know, when these things are written, and if you don't have somebody that knows English, that person that's writing is looking through the eyes of a American lens. They're looking at writing stuff. That's why he had to know the culture and the spiritual side of our people before he could put anything down. None of these guys did that wrote these books. And then over here in the East Coast, nobody that goes to the Midwest, when they read something, this is true because it's written down. And they believe it when it isn't the truth. Yeah, you know, so, I mean, the historians we met with in Wyoming, they're the ones that said, we're the ones that put everybody off track because of what we wrote. We didn't know a people, but we wrote about a people that we didn't even know. So when we gave a talk over there, they couldn't believe that we could stand up and just talk like this. Them, they have to have papers and all this and like this, and they couldn't just talk from their heart, the truth. Yes?
Since I was a young man, I've gone around and talked with a number of elders, or had the privilege of being able to talk with some elders, and they were scared that at some point there might not be enough history to be able to maintain it. Do you feel that the Great Spirit has protected things well enough that this culture is going to be able to continue and reestablish
Yes.
itself well?
Yep. It's a wake-up call for the Red Nations. It's time to, like I said, it's time to look at your ancestors before anybody came to this continent, because you was a nation. It's time to look to that nation. And they all had ways of prayer, each nation. And they all had a way to talk to the Creator, God. And that's what they forgot about. So it's time to go back to your ancestors. They were doing it right. Do it like your ancestors. It's time to be truthful and honest with yourself, like this. Yeah, so.
Getting you in the sweat lodge and having the ancestors look you over, that was a good thing on your part, Floyd.
I mean, that's because he was doubting. So my grandfather showed himself, and then he put it together that, hey, okay, this is what he really says. You know,
It's a real
because
deal.
it's see to believe. Touch it to make sure it's real. That's the system that's here. Yes?
Where did you say Crazy Horse died?
At Fort Robinson. But at the time, it was Camp Robinson. After his death, it became Fort Robinson. So our nation, the Lakota Nation, around our nation, there's a 5-mile strip that this government took. And why all the forts are made on this strip, why all the capitals are on this strip. Helena, Bismarck, Pierre, Lincoln, Cheyenne are all on this strip outside of our Lakota Nation. So when the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota stand up together, we're known as the Great Sioux Nation. And 7 countries know of our nation before the United States, because we already dealt with 7 countries before the United States became the United States. So they know of our nation. So time for truth and like this and stuff. Yes?
Yeah, my wife and I were just down Pine Ridge last month, and she insisted on going, and a lot of people were staying in Custer. And a lot of people say, you don't want to go down there, there's nothing to see down there. But, you know, we wanted to see it, and there's a Badlands,
Yeah.
and it's about the size of Connecticut, and it's drove on it like for 5 hours. Everybody talks about Custer's battle of Custer all the time, but what happened at Wounded Knee was really bad.
Yeah.
Hardly anything there. I mean,
You know,
I was very depressed at the site because it was a very small monument up on the hill. There was no building whatsoever that you could go get more information what happened there. It was like nothing.
Yeah, a lot of assumptions.
You know, we were saying like, there's nothing here. You have nothing to remember what happened. It wasn't one of several things that ever happened in history of the as far as my concerned. And I'm just surprised that the government, that they don't want nothing there, basically. They want to
Yeah. You know what, the county where I come from, Zebi County on Shannon River. One year will be the poorest county in this nation. The next year will be Shannon County, where Pine Ridge is. And we'll be the second poorest county in the nation. And whenever we're the poorest, then Shannon County is the second poorest in the nation. They've been switching back and forth, but nobody's telling that.
Somebody said that
And I live in Dupree.
they don't give away the good land, they give away the bad land. That they use for-
And then down there too,
Nothing really there.
yeah, and down there too, while we were in hiding, in the 30s, some of the in-laws heard our stories. They took it back to Pine Ridge and told these stories and put themselves in it, because nobody from family could say nothing. So the Slim Buttes that our family in that book is northwest part of South Dakota. It's 20 miles north and south, 10 miles east and west. That's the stronghold that our family were talking about. They took it back down there and they said the Badlands was a stronghold, when that is up there where the family was. But on Pine Ridge, there's a little hill, they call it Slim Buttes, and like this, from our family stories. There's a Sheep Mountain, that's up there in the northwest part of it. And then before where Pine Ridge is, Red Cloud, he was down there by Fort Robinson, his agency. Before that, he was by Fort Laramie. Where Pine Ridge is, that was Spotted Tail Agency. But when they gave my grandfather this agency, they moved Red Cloud to where Spotted Tail was, and they moved him east. And the government said these two, they could kill each other, fight each other like this. Why they put them like that together? But these are stuff that they're not telling. Fight yourself. Always be truthful and honest with yourself when you speak of the truth. And make sure it's the truth that you're talking. That way you're not lying to yourself when you speak the truth. And when they took our children, the Kearsarge family hid the children. Why we still know our culture, language, traditions, and like this. But sometimes they ask from what this government did to my family, being hunted and all this. And this is where I have to tell them the truth. That as truth a second ago is already in the past. You can't turn time back. Nobody can. But the change that needs to be made is now and the future. What we could make this change, and that's where this change has to come. Because everything in the past is already done, can't change it, already happened, and all this. So right now, today and tomorrow is where you look to make these changes so it doesn't happen again. And like that, so that's why I always say, you always have to be truthful and honest. So sometimes I ask, don't you feel revengeful and like this, but I have to tell the truth that, hey, that already happened. I can't turn time back. If I can, I'll save my family and like this, but I can't. It already happened. It's just like what you just said a second ago is already in the past. You can't take it, like this, but now in the future is where we have to concentrate, where we be made. So it's time for these things now, like this. So I don't, because how my grandfathers look at a person, at the heart, not the color of their skin, and like this. And that's why my grandfather, how he feels about children, why we want to, even though it already happened, but where they're laying, we want them to come home to their families that belongs to them. And we have a way of prayer that we could find these out and do this, make a correction, at least for those families, for our people, and like this. So, but each nation has a way of making a prayer to the Creator. Their ancestors have talked to God. And that's why I said, look at your ancestors, because that's how you have to walk to talk with the Creator and God. But again, only each individual could do this. Nobody could do it for you. And like this. You know, so it's time to walk with respect on our grandmother. Always be truthful and honest to yourself, like this. So these kind of things, I mean, the children and like this, or what you're saying, I mean, everybody feels bad, but it already happened. You can't turn time back. So now we gotta, today and tomorrow, make sure it doesn't happen, and always be truthful and honest. And time to, in our language, okichapo means help each other. It's time to do that. Don't look at skin color, look at your heart like this. But again, only each individual could do this. So why I said everything comes to, nobody could walk in your shoes but you. And like this. So. But, it's time for these things. Like that. So.